Hi everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. This is the 34th video in a 50 video series that's going through the statements of the Autism Quotient. The Autism Quotient is a pre-screening tool that is often used as part of the autism assessment. And when I was going through that assessment myself, I realised that we really had to look at things as a deficit. And most of these videos have been looking at sort of flipping that narrative and looking at things as a positive. And if we can't look at it as a positive, are there mitigations that could be put in place? With this one, I've done it slightly differently because it's given me the opportunity to talk about something that was brought up in my assessment and something that I think is a helpful way to sort of look at ADHD and autism together, because as much as I haven't yet had an ADHD diagnosis, I am going through the process of that, and it's been very much suggested throughout my journey with my autism diagnosis that I probably do also have ADHD. And the reason why that is because the question, the statement here is, I enjoy doing things spontaneously, and I said slightly disagree. And it's kind of between slightly agree, slightly disagree to this because it depends on the time. So, but overarchingly, it would be slightly disagree. And I believe this is very much down to the fact that I am AuDHD, autism and ADHD together, that I have both ADHD and autism, and how those two things interact. And as part of the assessment, I was talking to the person who did the assessment afterwards when I was having my feedback session, and I described it in the way that I'm going to describe it today, to an extent, but I've kind of gone further into that since. And I described it as two dragons that were sometimes fighting and sometimes working together. And what I've sort of come up with an explanation for me and for the people around me to be able to understand why things may change for me when it comes to spontaneity, because it's sort of a sticking point for a lot of people to why they can't understand why I can do things spontaneously sometimes and not at others. And I've called it my 4 states of my dragons. So the 4 dragon states, I suppose. So what I'm going to do is first of all go through those dragon states, and then I'm going to have a look at where autism diverges and where it crosses over, so where there are differences within the traits and where there are shared traits. So first of all, I'm going to have a look and explain my analogy of the 4 dragon states of my AuDHD. So yeah, as I said when I was going through the assessment process, I had a sort of an epiphany that it felt like 2 dragons. Autism and ADHD sometimes felt like 2 dragons, and this definitely sort of fits into when it comes to spontaneity, being spontaneous. That sometimes they fight and sometimes they work in synchronicity. So I've kind of, to be able to explain it a little bit more to myself, so for me to be able to understand it better, but for me to also explain it to other people, I've sort of broken it down to 4 different states of how my mind may be working at any one time in relation to quite specifically to spontaneity. So state 1 is synchronicity, and this is when autism and ADHD are working in unison with each other. ADHD has a need for novelty and spontaneity, while autism focuses on planning, routine, sameness, and security of those spontaneous aspects. So it's when my brain will go, I want to do this from an ADHD perspective. That seems really interesting to do, and then I get over that hump of doing it. That can come with being autistic sometimes, of not quite being able to get over it because you're planning, or because of the fact that it will interrupt routine, or that it's not the same, or you don't feel safe doing it. But it's when I've got over that hump of that, and ADHD is on its motor and it's going, right, let's book this and do this. So let's say it's going to a theme park or going to the cinema. I actually get over that hump of booking it, because I actually often, when I'm not in this state, I will get stuck in the planning process, or I will get stuck in the telling myself that there's going to be too many people there, or thinking about all the bad things that will happen. And I would say that on average, this happens rarely. Out of all of these 4 states, this is the most rare, and I've kind of worked it out to be about 5% of the time, probably twice a month this may happen. And it's very easily missed when I'm in that moment, because I then can go switch back into the over planning situation. So basically what happens is that the ADHD plans it. This is the best way of describing it. The ADHD allows me to book it, to jump into the realms of doing something that I don't know what's going to happen in. But then then autism jumps in and does all the planning. So I'll still do a lot of planning around it, but the planning is done after the booking. So I've already gone through that process of booking something, and therefore I'm going to go to it. But then autism comes in and goes, right, let's plan everything about it. But it's planned with excitement, because I've already booked it, as well as having the worry and stuff that comes with autism. It's sort of driven by an excitement that I got from booking it and getting over the hump of booking it. So that's synchronicity for me, which is number one. Number two is when the dragons are battling, and this is when autism and ADHD battle over spontaneous impulses. The planning overtakes the need for novelty and spontaneity, while the need for novelty is still very much in my head, which means I spend a lot of time planning something, and then it gets to the point of where I've over planned it, because I've done too much planning before I've done any of the booking or really looked into the booking side of it. But I've looked into more of the detail of how busy it's going to be. So I've looked at the things that my autistic side of my brain worries about before I've got to the point of ADHD jumping over and booking it. And this is where I probably am most of the time. And this doesn't have a hugely negative impact on my mental health or anything. I just accept the fact that this is the case. And I'd probably say this is about 60% of the time that my brain works in this fashion. It doesn't, like I say, it doesn't really have any negative impacts to me, apart from the fact I'm not doing that thing. But this is where I am most of the time, going down into rabbit holes of researching something before I do it, and researching it so much that I've found all of the things that could potentially be wrong with it, and then I go, oh no, can't do that. But then there is a battle with ADHD going, no, you need to go, I want that novelty, and then and it can be really frustrating, and I can be frustrated at myself for the fact that I want to do it, but I'm not going to do it because of the fact that all of those things that I've overplanned with autism are still in my head. And it means that thing doesn't happen. And that is the majority of the time for me. And then the third is by far the worst, which is wipeout/burnout, which is as if, and if you're a Game of Thrones fan, I'm going to quote Game of Thrones here. It's as if the 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐿 has said 𝐷racarys. If you watch Game of Thrones, if you know about Game of Thrones, the word 𝐷racarys is used. It's an old language in the show or the book that's called Valerian, and it's the word that makes dragons set fire to everything that's around them, and it's often used as an execution method and things like that in the show. And that's how it feels. It feels like she said that, and the whole of my brain is just scattered everywhere, and there's nothing left there. I can't think about anything. So this is when, and I feel like this is when the two work together against me, and all of my executive function ceases to exist, because I have pushed myself too much to try and do this thing, and I really want to do it, and then I feel shattered by the fact that I wanted to do it, but then. So I've got my ADHD side of my brain wanting to be spontaneous to a great extent, and autism going, no, can't do that to a great extent, and then it's this horrible feeling of the fact that I want to do something but I really can't do it, and that really does have a negative impact on my mental health, and it's like I'm not stuck between it like I am with when it's battling. I'm not stuck between whether I should and shouldn't do it. I'm very much stuck in I can't do it, and I'm buried under this whole thing, and it feels like the best way of describing it is, like I say, all my executive function's gone, but it feels like any element of spontaneity at that point becomes any element of doing something, it feels like spontaneity to me. The panic that I get from being spontaneous in relation to autism is then everything. Just doing anything, getting up off my seat can feel like spontaneity, and it feels like it's then having an effect on my overarching ability to do anything, and even my routine becomes a problem because it feels like I'm pushing spontaneity on myself because that's not what I'm doing at that moment. So it's kind of like I'm kind of locked in this thought process, and that probably happens about 20% of the time when spontaneity is brought into the equation. so it is a considerable amount of time. It's not as much anymore. I do feel like my synchronicity is increasing, that because I'm being more aware of when I could possibly push the synchronicity, and I think wipeout, burnout is not really happening as much. So I would probably say, as much as I probably put synchronicity up to 10% now that I'm aware of the way that I feel most of the time, and aware of when I'm starting to burn out or when something's becoming a problem. And I'd probably put this one at maybe 15%. So yeah, there's a bit of a change coming with this, where as I'm getting to know myself better, wipeout isn't becoming as big a problem. But it is still a problem, and it is when I am trying to fight against it so hard that my brain just goes no and pretty much shuts down. And then there's the fourth one, which is dormancy, being dormant. And this is when ADHD is not really bothered about spontaneity and impulsivity. It's not really, I'm not really thinking about anything novel, and autism doesn't have to fight against it and or find a plan to make it happen. So there's no need for any of those things. So that's when I'm kind of indifferent to any kind of spontaneity, where I don't really think about it, and I don't want to do anything different. I'm quite happy just plodding along and doing everything that I need to do, which I've put as about 15% of the time that's the case. So yeah, they're my four. There's synchronicity, battle, wipeout, and dormant. Most of the time my brain's in battle. My favourite of all of them would be synchronicity, because that allows me the spontaneity to be able to go and do things, but it does still have a drain on me. Going and doing that thing does still have a drain on me, but there's enough excitement there built up for me to be able to go and do it, because I've booked it and I've gone through that process. So most often is battle. My favourite is synchronicity. I don't mind the dormant one. It just feels like it just feels like I'm not going anywhere or doing anything, but that's fine with me. I don't really mind that. So if I was to say that where I would stay between two, I'd rather have 50% of the time dormant and 50% of the time in synchronicity, or maybe 25% synchronicity and 75% dormant. Dormant's quite calming for my head. It's fine. It makes me feel very, very centered, and the synchronicity allows me to make sure that I am going and doing new things. I hope that made sense. It makes sense in my head. I'm hoping that anybody who has ADHD will recognize these things. Maybe not so much wipeout. Hopefully not as many people have wipeout. Maybe people don't, which would be fantastic, because I don't like to think that people would have to go through that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look at the traits that are assigned to autism and ADHD, and also the ones that are shared traits between autism and ADHD, which should give some sort of context to all of these, the reason why this may happen. So here's a Venn diagram. It's a Venn diagram that I have got from a website which looks at couples who are neurodiverse, so where somebody is either neurotypical within a relationship and the other person is neurodivergent, or there are two people with two different types of neurodivergency within a relationship. It's actually a really good tool to use if you are in a relationship that is neurodiverse with two different types of two different types of neurodiversity in there. So either neurotypical, like I say, with somebody who's neurodiverse, or two different people with different neurodiversities within it. So it's quite good, because it's got a lot of resources that allows you to be able to maybe understand a little bit more about the other person, which is a great website. I will link it in the description below. So let's have a look at this Venn diagram that I have pulled off that website. So this is the Venn diagram that I was talking about. So you have on the ADHD side, you have I'll do overlapping first actually. So the overlapping traits are sensory issues, hyperfixation, interrupting, insomnia, restlessness, stimming, fidgeting, difficulty with friendships, people are creative, OCD tendencies, executive function struggles, emotional dysregulation, and depression and anxiety. They're not necessarily traits. Actually, looking at it now that I've thought about it, depression and anxiety aren't really traits. They're add-ons to it from a mental health perspective of things that might happen. But as you can see, there's a lot of overlap there. the different traits are, for ADHD, inattention, hyperactivity, mind wandering, time blindness, working memory, risk taking. I would also say that with risk taking, I would also say you could rephrase that as impulsivity, forgetful, and craves novelty. And then you also have, on the autism side, social signals unclear, deficits in reciprocal, I was going to say reciprocity, which is kind of the same thing, reciprocal communication, special interests, prefers routine, rigid with rules, literal, detail focused, social overload, and social isolation. So you can see straight away when you put in there rigid with rules and prefers routine, and then you've got craves novelty and risk taking, and inattentive and hyperactivity. Those things don't necessarily fit together. So it's very clear why those battles happen. This is the reason why I've shown this, is that there is it's really obvious when you look at it from the two opposite sides that there are things that just fight against each other. You've got the middle bit that work together, and then you've got the two sides here that are actually quite opposite to each other. And I think that's why it's so difficult to, when you're going through the diagnosis process, to understand the fact of being ADHD and autistic at the same time, that yes, there are lots of similarities with it, but those things that work against each other, they can be quite challenging for you to understand, but also can sort of mask the fact that you're autistic. Having autism and ADHD can mask the two facts. ADHD can kind of mask autism. I will apologise, I've said this on my last few videos, I've changed medication and I'm not sleeping very well either now as well. That's the new thing that's happened with this medication. So my brain is all over the place. So if I keep repeating things, I apologise. But yeah, so my point here is that you can see that there are various different differences that are opposite to each other. That's my point, that they're opposite to each other. So if you've got autism and ADHD, they're clearly going to fight against each other at times, but also help each other and help and allow you to maybe push through things. And ADHD does at times allow me to push through things that autism maybe would not allow me to do. I will be interested to see that if I do get a diagnosis and I go on medication, what the difference is going to be there, and how my traits will change in relation to ADHD, and what effect that will have on my the way autism affects my life. Because ADHD has almost acted as an unconscious social mask that was even masking autism for me, for me personally. So I didn't even know because of it, and I think that's why it took so long maybe for me to get to the point of getting a diagnosis. It meant that I wasn't held to a routine and could seem spontaneous to other people, but I was a complete control freak when it came to anything that was spontaneous. I ended up burning myself out trying to control the situation so much. So everybody thought that I was able to be spontaneous, but at the same time it was burning me out, and I was also needed to be massively in control of the situation at all times. So hopefully that Venn diagram's has got a good amount of information on it for you. And if you are thinking that maybe you have got both, that how these things may interact together and against each other at times, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look at a few different figures around prevalence, and some, I'm going to say facts, but they're not really facts. They're figures that are there from multiple studies that have been put out there, because this hasn't really been looked at hugely together, because for a reason that I'll go into in a second. But I'm just going to go and have a look at some prevalence information on ADHD and autism combined. So the first fact I think is the most important one before talking about any of the rest of these, is that until 2013, a practitioner was unable to diagnose autism and ADHD comorbidly. So together, it couldn't be diagnosed together. And I think that it's important that that's happened. And I think it's interesting that is the case, because it is extremely prevalent, but we don't know how prevalent because of the fact we've only just been able to get the statistics together for this, because it's only 11 years since that changed to even be able to happen. But it's taken a long time for for those for those dual diagnoses to sort of be coming in to get as quite as regularly enough for us to be able to actually look at it with any kind of numbers. So these numbers that I'm going to give, they do feel like they're quite far apart when it gives the lowest and the highest percentage that something could be, but that's because it's coming from multiple studies that are still quite new. It also occurs quite having ADHD and autism together occurs quite high both in families and individuals. So it happens quite often in fact in individual cases, but also if there is a family history of having autism and ADHD, then it's much more likely that you will have autism and ADHD. So 30 to 65% of children with ADHD also have clinically significant autism traits. So that is 30 to 65% of people who have ADHD also have traits of autism that would be significant in a clinical setting, so potentially could be diagnosed with. Between 22 and 83% of autistic children also meet the criteria for ADHD. So that's the flip of it. And again, there's a big disparity between those numbers, but it's clear that it's a high number of people who are autistic also meet the criteria of having ADHD. As we've already seen, there is significant neurological overlap. There are a lot of similarities between the two. And there is estimated that between 50 and 72% of genetic factors also overlap. So when we've looked at genetic factors of people who have ADHD and people who have autism, anywhere between 50 and 72% of their genes will actually be exactly the same. And so that's obviously very telling as well, because as we look at things in a more genetic way moving forward, which I think we will be doing with autism and ADHD, the fact that there is that correlation is very clear that there could be causation there as well. That it could be that ADHD and autism is sort of intrinsically linked. And as a thought experiment from my perspective, and I've not looked into this because I feel if I go down this rabbit hole, I'll spend forever down this rabbit hole. But I kind of have the question of is there a reason why that they are comorbid, that these are so prevalently occurring together? And for me, I do question, is ADHD autism's response in the development period of your brain for it to be able to they're both neurodevelopmental. I'm not denying that, but does your brain develop ADHD as a protection mechanism against the negative impacts that autism might have? So as your brain is developing in the womb, is ADHD created as a way of helping with the fact that your brain has a autistic neuro pathway building system happening? And my question would be is everybody who has ADHD, do they have autism to some extent? But it depends on how much ADHD is masking that autism and how prevalent autism is for that person, and how so if somebody's autism traits aren't that strong and aren't having that much of an impact on them, does that just present as ADHD? But does not everybody who has autism, they may not have developed ADHD, and therefore that would say that means that you could be autistic without ADHD, but could you not have ADHD without autism? It's just that is just a head thought. It's just a theory, a head thought. Just a theory that I've come up with that potentially could be the case, and I'm only going on what my experience of it, and it would make sense for me personally. Is like ADHD does protect me quite a lot from some of the negative impacts that autism can have from a societal perspective. I don't agree with the fact that I should have to face those negativities from a societal perspective, but ADHD does sometimes allow me to push through on those things, or has allowed me to in the past. And I just thought it would be an interesting thought process that if everybody who has ADHD, do they have autism? It's just that that autism it just presents differently in everybody, so therefore it's not as easy to pick up when it comes to diagnosing ADHD on its own, or what's perceived as ADHD on its own. The one thing I do know is that there is a thought process that we should really in the future have an ADHD or an autism sort of spectrum. I know that's one school of thought, and maybe that's falling into that. So just a bit of an interesting thing to think about. If you are ADHD, do you think that's possible, that that's the case? I'd love to hear whether anybody has any insight on that, and I might choose to go down that rabbit hole very soon. So that's that for this video. A little bit of a different one than I usually do when I do these questions, but I felt like it was a really good opportunity to talk about autism and ADHD together and how I experienced that in some way. As always, if you could comment and let me know what you think, any ideas you have on the back of this, how you experience your ADHD would be fantastic. And again, as always, subscribing means that more people get to see the channel, and the more people that get to see the channel, the more people that I can get this information out to, and people can see how I experience my life, and I'd like as many people as possible to see that. So if you could subscribe, that would be really, really lovely of you. If not, don't worry, I will get over it. Anyway, thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.